Thank you all for being here. My name is Mia, and I'm a founding member of Stop Ecocide Toronto, the local branch of an international movement working to criminalize mass environmental destruction at the International Criminal Court. As we speak, Canada is burning. We are only in May, and climate-exacerbated wildfires are already burning in several provinces. 69% of world wildlife populations have plummeted since 1970. Negligence in extractive processes that result in pollution threaten the health and safety of our communities. It is clear that our current legislation is insufficient. It is clear that we need a law against ecocide, and that is why we are here today. As our allies in the EU move forward, recognizing crimes comparable to ecocide at the European Crime Directive, Canada lags behind. However, MPs Patrick Weiler, Elizabeth May, Alexandre Boulerice, among others, have recognized the powerful potential in creating legal guardrails to protect our natural world. We thank them for their commitment and support to the Stop Ecocide movement. A majority of mass environmental destruction is greenlit by a few powerful individuals. Criminalizing ecocide would change the decision-making calculus for these individuals by holding them criminally liable, acting as a strong deterrent to further harming our planet. Global communities are calling for a law against ecocide. For example, at the United Nations Environment Assembly in March, the joint global statement of major groups called for a, quote, universal recognition of ecocide as an international crime. Canadians here at home stand alongside the global community in this call to action. In just over 2 months, Stop Ecocide Canada collected well over 1,000 signatures from Canadians across the country in an e-petition to the federal government. We demanded that our country support the international recognition of ecocide law. The message is clear. It is time Canada endorses the criminalization of ecocide. We will now hear from environmental champions who sit in our House of Commons.
Well, thank you very much for the kind introduction. It's a real honor to be up here with Stop Ecocide Canada and my colleagues Elizabeth May and Alexandre Boulerice, and be gathered on the ancestral and unceded territory of the Algonquin and Anishinaabe people. And I think it's important that we mention that as well, because when we're talking about ecocide and issues like environmental racism, it's typically Indigenous people, the most vulnerable people, that are disproportionately impacted. And it was my pleasure earlier today to be able to table the petition from Stop Ecocide Canada that was led by Amelie Wilkinson and received over 1,200 signatures right across the country. And in fact, just a few years ago, I was able to table a similar petition to advocate for Canada to be a constructive partner to advance an ecocide law internationally. And of course, this is part of an important international movement to ensure that we're deterring this type of behavior and that we have accountability for those that are responsible for the most serious forms of environmental damages. And it's incredibly important because we have to tackle the three interlinked crises of the biodiversity crisis, the pollution crisis, and of course the climate crisis that you mentioned earlier that we've really seen the effects of more than ever the last few years. And it's important that we do so that we can protect nature, but also because we are directly impacted by the deteriorating situation that we're seeing around the world, and it's directly impacting the health of Canadians and people right across the world. So we can't really see ourselves as separate from the environment at all. But unfortunately, individuals, especially managing companies, are often not held accountable or personally accountable for significant environmental disasters that occur in Canada or all around the world. Local laws are oftentimes insufficient. There might be limited liability for companies, and they budget accordingly. Or they may simply say that the fine is too much for the company and to pay, and they'll threaten to declare bankruptcy and roll it on to the public dime to remediate it. And this seems maybe a little bit far-fetched. But indeed, this is what happened in British Columbia just a decade ago with the Mount Polley disaster. So, of course, having things like sufficient environmental bonds is one way to prevent this right from the beginning, or to prevent it from falling to the public. But having a strong ecocide law will provide a deterrent effect for individuals and companies to undertake risky behavior that puts the public and the environment at risk. So I do want to tip my hat to Stop Ecocide Canada for putting forward this petition and the growing global movement that's looking to address this significant challenge. And throughout Canada's history, particularly over the last 9 years, Canada has taken some important measures to address environmental challenges domestically. Thinking about our first real plan, ambitious plan to tackle climate change. Just last year, we were able to update arguably Canada's most important law that protects humans and the environment from toxic substances in the Environmental Protection Act. And just recently last year in British Columbia, we were able to sign a nature agreement to protect or to fund the protection of 30% of our land by 2030. And so these are all really important things that we've done. And I do also want to recognize the legislation that my colleague to my right here, Elizabeth, worked on and we passed through committee with the environmental racism bill, which I think is very germane to the discussion that we're having today. And also, since 2015, Canada has played an outsized role in advancing environmental action globally. And I'm just thinking of things like on nature conservation, having hosted the Conference of the Parties in Montreal, we're able to bring the world together to have a global commitment to protect 30% of lands by 2030. And in fact, we were the first country to donate into the Global Biodiversity Fund to support developing countries to do the same. We're also able to, just a month ago, bring countries from around the world together to negotiate having a plastics treaty that's critical to tackle our pollution crisis. And Canada has also played a role in bringing countries together to take more ambitious action on climate change, as well as leading the push to have a loss and damages fund, which is really important when we're thinking about some of the least responsible and most vulnerable countries from the effects of climate change. So Canada's long been a supporter of international law and the international rules-based system, which, as I mentioned, allows us to punch above our weight. And it's critical that we do that so that we can play our part in tackling some of these global crises. And just as we've done in the past, I think working together with our international counterparts on creating an offense of ecocide would be another important step in this direction. And so I do want to, again, just recognize and express my gratitude for those that are really pushing for this, both in civil society and otherwise.
Bonjour tout le monde. Alexandre Boulerice, je suis le député de Rosemont-la-Petite-Patrie, chef adjoint du NPD. Alors, ça me fait plaisir d'être ici au nom de ma formation politique. Merci beaucoup à Stop Ecocide Canada pour l'invitation et surtout pour tout le travail important que vous faites. On parle beaucoup ces temps-ci de la Cour pénale internationale. Aujourd'hui, on va en parler, mais d'une autre façon. D'une façon qui est importante aussi pour l'avenir de la planète, l'avenir de notre petite bille bleue au sein de l'univers qui est en danger en ce moment. Ce qu'on s'aperçoit, c'est que les cadres législatifs et réglementaires nationaux ou internationaux sont insuffisants en ce moment. Et on le voit avec la crise climatique qui accélère à grande vitesse. On le voit également dans d'autres crises environnementales à travers le monde, que ce soit des crises de pollution, que ce soit des crises également de biodiversité, de disparition des espèces, ou quand l'espèce ne disparaît pas, bien, une chute du vivant qui est importante, où il n'y a plus beaucoup d'individus dans telle espèce, où les espaces naturels sauvages reculent de plus en plus devant l'avancée industrielle ou alors domiciliaire de l'être humain qui prend de plus en plus de la place sur la planète. Alors, qu'est-ce qu'on fait face à ce constat? C'est qu'il faut être capable d'être imaginatif et faire les choses autrement. Il y a un mouvement qui s'appelle les droits de la nature, pour donner à la nature des droits juridiques et des statuts légaux. C'est une manière de faire. Il y a quelques années, j'ai eu la chance de pouvoir déposer un projet de loi à Ottawa, ici au Parlement, pour donner un statut juridique au fleuve Saint-Laurent. Mais c'est aussi un mouvement qui existe en Amérique du Sud, en Amérique centrale, en Europe, notamment en Espagne. Alors, c'est une nouvelle manière d'approcher ça, qui ne met pas l'être humain au-dessus de la nature ou à côté ou qui contrôle les écosystèmes, mais plutôt qu'on fait partie et on est interdépendant. Une autre manière d'appréhender et d'améliorer la défense de l'environnement puis des écosystèmes, c'est l'approche qui est prônée par Stop Ecocide, qui dit que si on détruit ou on massacre des populations humaines, on peut être tenu criminellement responsable pour ça. Mais si on détruit puis on massacre des environnements, des espèces, une biodiversité, des ressources naturelles qui sont uniques sur la planète, il y a aussi la possibilité d'avoir une responsabilité criminelle. Et c'est pour ça qu'il faut porter ce dossier-là pour que la notion puis cette idée nouvelle d'écocide fasse son chemin sur la scène internationale pour qu'on ait les outils juridiques pour être capable de dire aux gens, comme Patrick l'a dit un peu plus tôt, si vous commettez tel crime, si vous commettez tel acte, si vous êtes responsable de la destruction massive d'environnements naturels, vous allez devoir en payer le prix, il va y avoir des conséquences, vous allez pouvoir être poursuivi. Moi, je pense que c'est une excellente idée, c'est un pas en avant. Je suis très fier d'être ici avec mes collègues d'autres partis pour qu'on puisse avancer sur ce dossier-là, ici au Canada, mais également sur la scène internationale. Je pense que c'est tous ensemble qu'on va être capable de faire appliquer ce nouveau type de droit que vous prônez. Merci beaucoup.
I think, thank you, Mia. Elizabeth May, Member of Parliament for Saanich Islands and leader of the Green Party of Canada. Je suis très fière d'être ici avec tous mes collègues et aussi particulièrement avec les jeunes, les militants en faveur des changements de loi mondiale pour protéger la nature et pour la recognition d'un crime d'écocide. My colleagues in elected Greens around the world were among the first to call for the change in international criminal law to recognize that ecocide is a crime and should be within the jurisdiction of the International Criminal Court. We are united as members of Parliament in that, even if we may quibble with claims of Canada's leadership. We recognize that we are together here to support a public movement of activists from all around the world who want to see a recognition and a change in our laws. I can't add anything to the excellent things that Patrick and Alexandre have already said. We recognize in the coming Montreal decisions that Patrick mentioned from COP15 and biodiversity was of UN documents, probably the first time I saw as many references to Mother Earth, to Mother Nature. And this is in the Indigenous people's worldview. I just want to add that ecocide is matricide, and we really need to take some responsibility for ensuring that the Earth, our home, and human civilization have a future. Merci.
If that concludes, opening remarks, we will go to questions. We have a question online, so I'm going to unmute Dylan Robertson of the Canadian Press, and go ahead, Dylan.
Hi there, thanks for taking our questions. I noticed that you've got representatives from most of the political parties, but not the Conservatives, and I'm just wondering if you could walk through what sort of approach you had with that caucus, what you heard back, if anyone was biting on that, or if it was total silence. How would you describe your outreach to the Conservatives?
So throughout the 4 years that Stop Ecocide Canada has existed, we've consistently met with MPs throughout the country. Unfortunately, due to this timing and for this particular initiative, there were no Conservative MPs who were available to meet with us and talk about this or to attend the press conference.
And I would also like to add that we have been reaching out to Conservative MPs, and it is our aim to get cross-party support, and we will still be working towards it.
Right, and just so I understand, you're working towards cross-party support, but at the moment you don't actually have endorsements from any Conservative MPs, or please correct me if I've got that wrong?
We don't have any endorsements as of now, but we have reached out to them, and we hope that we'll be meeting with them soon to talk about it and leading the discussion forward through all political opinions.
I'm going to use moderator's privilege to ask a question, if I might. One might be able to say that, environmental crimes or ecological crimes are in fact crimes against humanity. So why a separate distinction on this? Why not sort of use the existing crimes against humanity framework, or does it just not apply? I'd like to sort of hear you on that.
Yeah, that's a really pertinent question. Ecocide would be added to the Rome Statute as the Fifth Amendment. And we see that right now the 4 parts of the Rome Statute focus primarily on crises towards humanity in wartime. So they're mostly applicable for times of conflict. However, as we know, a vast majority of environmental destruction happens in peacetime. So there isn't a specific legal framework that exists to address this type of environmental degradation, things like negligent extractive processes. So it's very fundamental that we have something new to address that specifically.
Moreover, ecocide also takes into account that it is ultimately connected to humanity, and we thrive based on a thriving ecosystem. And ecocide is going to enforce that and make sure that we take into account that humanity ultimately won't exist unless we have a thriving ecosystem and a universe.
And just as my follow-up, and I apologize for some degree of ignorance on this file, in Canada specifically, I know that we have environmental protection laws, and I know that we likely could apply the criminal code in certain instances. But what about our own criminal code and our own criminal regime as it relates to putting the environment into the criminal code? Do you see that as a place where Canada could do something different or better than it's already doing?
Yes, so the recognition of ecocide law at the ICC would also require domestic implementation. We think that it's just an effective route to ensure that that happens domestically to ensure compliance. And there's just also the broader benefit of having sort of transnational guardrails around environmental policy in addition to having it implemented in the Canadian Criminal Code.
If I may, and thank you for the question, Stephanie. It's very relevant. There's very little environmental law that one can enforce in this country. When I went to law school to become an environmental lawyer, I realized, oh, gee, there's very little environmental law one can enforce in this country. For instance, you can, though, in the context, although it's not in the criminal code, you can access criminal authorities. You can lay in information under the Fisheries Act for destruction of fish habitat. You can go to the RCMP. You can attempt to have that law enforced. There's very little, if you're not a fish, you're really in trouble in this country. There's almost nothing to help human beings faced with environmental threats. That's why my private member's bill, Bill 226, attempts to redress that by, it has one more vote to go, by the way, in the Senate, so it's not law yet, but to create a program and a strategy for environmental justice. But really, to get the criminal code to deal with such things as the destruction of the very last habitat, of the very last nest of a migratory bird whose existence is protected under Canada's binding international law and treaty, under the Migratory Birds Protection Treaty, we don't protect and we don't make it illegal in Canada, which we could and should, to disturb the nest of a migratory bird under international law. And the courts have recently said that should be illegal. We don't make it illegal. So there's much more we could do with our domestic laws.
Since we have a few minutes, I see that Dylan has raised his hand again, so I will unmute you, Dylan, and go ahead for one question and one follow-up, and then that will bring us to the end of our time today. Hold on, Dylan, I'm going to unmute you.
I think I'm unmuted, but thanks again for taking our questions. Just curious about the international angle. I know that you're mostly talking about the law within Canada, but we have seen Ukraine raise ecocide, talking about going back to Chernobyl, looking at the explosion of the dam last year. I'm just wondering if you had any reflection, the MPs and the groups here present today on, using ecocide in the context of international law when it comes to within wars themselves, if this is something Canada should advocate for, because it seems like Ukraine is concerned about the poisoning of its environment and not just the actual casualties.
Je pense que si je peux me lancer, la réponse la plus rapide que je pourrais dire, c'est qu'effectivement, c'est une préoccupation, je pense qu'on doit avoir. Et l'utilisation de crimes contre l'environnement qui serait utilisé comme une arme de guerre, viendrait être couvert par la notion d'écocide sur la Cour pénale internationale. Donc, c'est une question intéressante que vous posez. On voit que parfois, la faim peut être utilisée comme arme de guerre, mais la destruction de l'environnement ou l'empoisonnement de certaines ressources pourrait aussi être couvert par la notion d'écocide par la Cour pénale internationale.
I just also agree and appreciate you raising the issue that for Ukraine, the legacy of Chernobyl is one that threatens their environment and their health, and it isn't when you're also in an active conflict zone where the toxic radioactive sarcophagus of Chernobyl continues to represent a threat. That is both ecocide and potential war crime as well. So there are some conflation of concerns here, but Ukraine is right to raise this, and we should do everything possible to support Ukraine, protect democracies, because I would say that while we're focused in this press conference on the threat of ecocide and recognizing it under the Rome Statute, I think we also recognize that protecting our environment globally requires healthy and functional democracies, and the rise of right-wing populist governments all around the world and declines in democracy are also a direct threat to our survival on this planet.
So I couldn't agree with my colleagues more on this, and I think there's probably the most clear case of ecocides are some of those that Dylan, that you just raised there, and clearly Vladimir Putin has no regard to following the international humanitarian law, the way terrorizing the people of Ukraine, and the trillions of dollars of damages that have been done to Ukraine is abhorrent. And as a country and as a global society, we need to do what we can to hold that regime accountable for those acts, whether it's the blowing up of the dam or the attacking the nuclear energy facilities. When you calculate not just the human cost and the financial cost of rebuilding the infrastructure, the cost of the environment is immeasurable. So I think it's one more way by advocating for an ecocide to be part of the Rome Statute. An international criminal law is one more way we can deter that type of behavior, because even in instance of war, there are rules that need to be followed, and deliberately causing environmental damage is not something that should be considered.
Dylan, did you have a follow-up?
No. No, thanks.
Go ahead.
Sorry, I do not have a follow-up. I just had some mic troubles there. Sorry about that. Thanks.
No problem. Okay, that brings us to the end of our time today. Thank you very much. Merci beaucoup.
Thank you.
Thank you.